Today we have none other than Kyiv Post correspondent Jason J. Smart, and that's because this might be one of the biggest days of the war, at least the Russia-Ukraine war. Ukraine just carried out biggest attacks so far, if I'm correct, right, Jason?
This is massive. Yeah, this is definitely the biggest day in the war in more than 3 years. It's absolutely huge. Russia suffered defeat, the largest defeat it has faced in 84 years. The worst assault it's ever received on its aircraft was June 22nd, 1941, when Operation Barbarossa kicked off. That is when the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union during World War II. But today, as a strategic value, was actually worse for Russia than that. This is a historic day in history, and it is actually a game changer in the war.
100%. So we'll wait a few seconds for people to join in. By the way, if you guys can hear us properly, this is the first time we're doing the interview. Hopefully you're not hearing my voice twice when Jason's speaking. Just drop a yes in the chat so I know. We have roughly, oh wow, we have 800 people watching live. Yep, sound is all good. We got crisp beats, but yeah, we'll get started. So how did this happen? I know is it just me or is audio kind of, whose audio is kind of low? Jason's? Okay, let me pull up, see if I can increase Jason's audio. So someone did mention it sounds like a Mossad tactic, and I saw a lot of people on social media comparing this to the pager attack. So maybe you can share a little bit about like how the preparation went for this attack, because from what I had read, it's like years in making.
Oh, this was huge. This was a year and a half at least in planning and executing. It was done by the SBU, which is the Security Service of Ukraine. And obviously they kept it very secret, and it was a huge success. And what was incredible about it was that most of the drones that were launched within the territory of Russia. That is, they did not come from Ukrainian territory. So the Ukrainians, due to the fact that the Russians are corrupt, had bribed people to help bring stuff in the country. They'd also used local people in Russia who thought they were creating drones for the Russian military. And so they were helping to create these drones that were then used against the Russian military. The Russians have started a wild witch hunt. It's something I talk about in the video I just put out on my YouTube channel. They started a wild witch hunt. They're going absolutely nuts trying to figure out how this all went down. Today's a Sunday, yet there's emergency meetings in the Duma, which is the parliament of Russia, to discuss how this happened. How is it possible? And Russian military bloggers are referring to this as being the Pearl Harbor of Russian history.
Yeah, and again, I like Jason said, he put out a great video. That's the video where I got a lot of my news. I have Jason's channel pinned in the chat, so if you guys see at the top, so definitely go check it out. He's been publishing a lot more. I think audience is having a little trouble with your voice, which it's highest on my side. Sometimes I just yell. You don't have to yell, just a little bit louder. But
I'll raise my voice.
Yeah, someone did ask an interesting question. It was driven all by the drones, right? As you just said, this wasn't drones coming from Ukraine. They took off inside Russia.
Yeah, it appears that it took off inside of Russia and across Russia. This was not just near the Ukrainian border. We're talking the far north, Murmansk. That's north of the Arctic Circle. We're talking the far, far east, where Russia had its aircraft they used specifically in the Pacific Ocean to challenge usually American aircraft and the American Navy and its fleets there. This is huge. This sets Russia back, not just that it has less airplanes than before, its ability to project strength globally has changed because of this. And we always talk about MAD, mutually assured destruction. Well, Russia's ability to assure destruction in case of attack has just been degraded significantly.
Yeah, 100%. And also the other part of this is someone's asking is like, how would Russia respond to this? Because it seems like we have negotiations tomorrow too, which we'll get into in a little while, I guess later in the stream. But do you think they will still go on? I'm sure Russia's going to be angry.
Oh, Russia's very angry. And their negotiators just arrived a couple hours ago, so it looks like they're still on schedule to do the talks, but nobody really expected anything from these talks. So I don't think that Ukraine risked or lost anything. Russia has been totally insincere in saying that it wants to start talks. It has done nothing to show that. And that's something that everyone in the U.S., whether it's President Trump or it's J.D. Vance even, who's by no means a Ukraine supporter, has said that the Russians are being simply unrealistic and not being fair, saying that they want to get even more of Ukraine's territory than what's currently occupied. Saying, no, give us another 60% of these other areas, and then we could start really talking about negotiations. It's just not serious. Russia doesn't want to negotiate.
Yep, and I know our audience is a little bit like we're more focused on China. We cover Russia-Ukraine war a lot more, so some of the questions may be little basics, but these are people who don't follow it. But someone just said Putin should have listened to Trump. He should have negotiated peace when he had the chance. I bet he's regretting that now.
Oh, he's regretting that now for sure. And what's incredible is that the Americans knew about this attack in advance. They were told about this. And I don't know if you remember, but Trump last week said, Putin doesn't recognize how much I've been done so far to make sure that things do not get worse for Russia. And it could get worse. He was probably referring to this. They knew this was coming. And the Americans have probably tried to slow this down, thinking peace talks would start and they'd go great. But at some point, even Trump realized, no, the Russians don't want to negotiate. They're not being sincere. They're not operating in good faith. And the attack today, as I say in the video I just put on my YouTube channel, the attack today is something that will degrade Russia's ability to project strength in the Arctic. We're talking in the Atlantic. We're talking against Ukraine, against Europe, in the Pacific. This is huge and a major setback. By far the largest loss that Russia has taken since June 22nd, 1941, when Nazi Germany, the ally of the Soviet Union, invaded the Soviet Union during World War II. This is simply huge. 34% at least of the strategic bombers of Russia used for nuclear deterrence were destroyed.
Yeah, and also I saw these are the bombers, like they have stopped production. So they are like old Soviet Union bombers, I'm guessing. So any damage, they cannot just repair it because they just don't have the supply chain anymore to rebuild this.
No, Russia has no ability to fix this. And that's what's sort of important here, is that these are not things that they were routinely producing tons and tons of. No, there was a limited quantity for the Soviet period. And they spent, if you look it up, in some cases, more than a decade refurbishing these airplanes, trying to bring them up to more modern standards. That's not something you just rebuild in a week. That was more than a decade lost in building these things. And they simply don't have the parts or the capacity to remake them.
Yeah, if I randomly start smiling because I'm seeing the chat and someone said, imagine this. I know Ukraine is claiming this was like a $2 billion damage for Russia. And someone said it's like $300 drones, maybe $500.
When I made my video this morning, the estimate was it was about $3 billion. It's now said it's closer to $7 billion. This is just such a massive defeat. And when you read the Russian Telegram channels, which I do, and I delight in, because you see the Russian soldiers are just shocked. I mean, you see their selfies and the voice messages they're leaving to their family members. They're going, what is going on? How's that possible? I don't understand. This is totally a mess. And it's true, it is. Russia just got its butt kicked in a significant way. And the fact that their air defense didn't pick it up, their intelligence services failed. And when you hear something incredible, Ukraine planned a lot of this and executed it from a building next to the FSB building of the Russian intelligence service. That is, in the building next door, they were located putting these drones together and getting ready to execute this. And the FSB, the Russian intelligence service, did not even know about it. Next door, what was going on.
Yeah, we actually have so much to talk about, but I forgot that you mentioned that Trump knew. So you're reading, so Trump tweeted just a few days ago that a lot of bad things could have happened to Russia if it wasn't for Trump. Putin needs to get in line. That's what Trump tweeted. You're reading that as like he knew this attack was coming. That's at least like the theory you're saying.
No, I mean, and in fact, the Ukrainians have said that they notified the White House in advance. And by the way, that's a huge change. The old White House, the Biden White House, was very scared of escalation, World War III, nuclear war. Jake Sullivan specifically was the one behind that. But today, it's very clear, and we've seen this throughout the past few months, is that Trump by no means is doing a lot to help Ukraine. At the same time, he's not doing a lot to restrict Ukraine. In his eyes, listen, if the Russians don't want to make a deal, they have what they have coming to them. And he's not trying to slow them down.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know a lot of people were criticizing Trump a lot more because of like some of the comments he made for Russia. I guess they were a little bit like just supporting Russia or trying to give them a way out. That's how I see it now, especially considering now that he tried the peace route. Now the administration is realizing, and I think a lot of people who were like against Ukraine are also realizing it's really Russia who doesn't want peace here. Like even after getting invaded, which like already so bad, Ukraine is still willing to negotiate with Russia, and they're willing to give up some territory that Russia already controls. But Russia is like, no, give us more or we'll come for more. That's what they're claiming.
Exactly. And it's incredible is that they said that during the last negotiations. They said, we're being fair. We only asked for 5 oblasts, which is like territories or states in the equivalent of the United States, 5 states. But next time around, we're going to ask for probably double that. And so they're very arrogant and cocky about this. But now they're in a different position. Russia, and there's a huge psychological aspect to this. Imagine how their military views what went down, their intelligence service, or the common Russian people. They can't say things are going great. The war is no longer just a faraway thing on Ukrainian territory.
Yeah.
This is taking place in Russia today. And it's something I talked about in my video I just put on YouTube, is the fact that right now, the Russian population is going ape. I mean, they're going absolutely nuts. They don't know how to understand how this is transpiring in their country, which they're always told is the world's greatest superpower.
All right, this is the crazy part because I see a lot of pro-Russian accounts on Twitter, which there are a lot. They always cry whenever Russia is attacked, but it's like Russia who started the war. It's like how Germans were back in World War II. They wanted to bomb everyone else, but whenever someone starts bombing Germany, they were all mad and like, this is war crime. Same thing Russia is repeating. They start the war, but they don't want anyone to attack back.
No, it's absolutely the case. And it's sort of the hypocrisy. And actually, Russia's already defined what happened today as being a form of terrorism. And they've launched criminal investigations into the terrorism. Well, listen, it was a military strike against military objects due to the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine. That is the only reason this happened. So Russia's in a hard situation. And when you look at the infighting that's broken out now between the Russian intelligence service, the Russian military, they're at each other's throats trying to scapegoat each other, trying to put the blame on each other. Because who's going to take responsibility for this single largest loss of aircraft since 1941?
This is also, I saw an interesting tweet Preston Stewart put out, a fellow YouTuber. Today is Prigozhin's birthday. So
Yes,
I don't know.
today is Prigozhin's birthday. Today is also the day of strategic aircraft of the Russian military. So it's a very auspicious date.
That's insane. Yeah, someone just joined. He's asking who we're talking to. We have Jason J. Smart. You're a special correspondent for Kyiv Post, but I think a title that's even better than that is you're personally banned by Putin in Russia. Maybe you can tell the audience a little bit about that. And by the way, before you start, I have Jason's channel on the chat right above. So if you guys see, definitely go check it out. It took us like almost a year, but we have convinced Jason to start publishing on YouTube now.
Yes, I just started posting last week, so I appreciate everyone who does follow that chat or follows that channel or subscribes to it, I should say. But yes, so I got tossed out of Russia in 2010. I've studied Russia, specifically the Putin regime, since about 2005, 2007, when I was in college still. And I started working with the Russian opposition to Putin about then, 2006, 2007. But in 2010, I got a letter from the Russian security service informing me that I was a threat to Russian national security due to my views and my work against the Putin regime. So it's been 15 years ago already, and I've maintained that. And obviously, I usually live in Kyiv, Ukraine, and I continue to oppose the Putin regime. But yeah, I decided it was a good idea to do a YouTube channel for those who understand what's going on inside of Russia. That's my focus. What's going on inside of Russia, what the Putin regime is, why it's a threat globally, because there's very few people covering that. And though I live in Ukraine, understanding our enemy is very important if we wish to defeat him.
100%. And if I'm remembering correctly, you were in Kyiv when Putin launched his invasion. Is that right?
Yeah. So, and it's been funny, is throughout this war, what's interesting is you've seen this change in Kyiv. Like today in Kyiv, there's rejoicing. People are extremely happy. It's very similar to when the Moskva, which was the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, got sunk, if you remember that. Huge celebrations. Everybody was happy. You remember when the Kursk Bridge, the bridge that connects mainland Russia to Russian-occupied Crimea, was attacked. Huge celebrations in Kyiv. Today is very similar. Everyone's very happy. And a lot of people go, whoa, they're reacting with too much joy. The Russians are going to react. They won't. They can't, because they already do every day. Every day, Russia attacks hospitals. It attacks infrastructure. It attacks the energy infrastructure. It attacks schools. It attacks apartment buildings. Russia is engaged in terrorism against the Ukrainian people. And so, no, nothing is going to change due to the fact that today, Russia got what it had coming to it.
100%. And yeah, we have almost 1,500 people watching live. So if you guys haven't hit the like button, be sure to do so down below. And a lot of our audience doesn't follow the war as closely as you, right? Maybe you can explain how this benefits Ukraine. Is it just about sending the message, or is it actually going to help Ukraine on the front lines?
Oh, it helps Ukraine on the front lines. So listen, there's like several, I'll say there's 3 different factors of why today is so important for those who don't follow the war at all. I'll break it down really fast. Is that on one side, Ukraine is frequently being attacked by ballistic missiles from Russia. They use bombers, which are some of the bombers that got destroyed today, in order to launch those attacks. So without them, simply Russia cannot fire as many ballistic missiles into Ukraine. Secondly, Russia is a major nuclear power. In fact, there's more nuclear missiles than any other country in the world, even more than the United States. But in order to deploy those, it needs to have things such as the bombers, these aircraft, as well as its strategic submarines. And that's something else that got destroyed today, or damaged significantly, was K-84, Yekaterinburg, which was an important submarine of Russia's Navy located in the far north. That was also damaged today. Once again, drones, might have contributed to the downfall of a Russian nuclear submarine today. That's absolutely amazing. But neither here nor there. Why does this all matter? Why does this matter in the grand scheme, global or geopolitics? Because Russia's ability to project strength just got diminished. The strategic bombers are supported by other things, such as aircraft that handles more things like radar or command and control or refueling. And guess what? Ukraine destroyed those. So without the ability to refuel in air, Russia, especially if you guys are into China, Russia's ability to project strength into the Pacific just took a significant hit. So this sets Russia back as a nuclear power. And thirdly, this is generational. This is not a hit that Russia will recover from in the next few weeks or a couple of years. This is decades into the future to rebuild to what they had before, if they ever can.
100%. Now, someone did ask if I can pull up the map of the attack. This base was the major attack point, like the most surprising. So the distance from this base to the Ukrainian border is more than New York to California or New York to LA. So that's where it's just shocking. And the other part is like planes were not protected. They were just wide open.
It's insane. It's true. And by the way, now it's come out, people that are doing really good OSINT have shown that the Ukrainians released a number of photos of them assembling these drones. And they've checked back where that was. It was in central Russia. They were assembling these drones in central Russia, which shows a lot of breakdowns in the security service of Russia. So not only do you have potentially Ukrainians inside the country doing this, but you also have Russians betraying their country doing this. The Ukrainians were presumably receiving intelligence from Russians who they'd corrupted to give over what was going on, where the defense was, where the security was. All of this went wrong. And far, far east Russia, just north of Mongolia, is where one of the largest attacks took place.
Okay, makes sense. And also, do you know what was attacked at each base? Because it was also timed very well all across the country, especially considering how big Russia is. That's where, how long did this take again? Like a year or 2 years in planning?
Oh, yes. It was more than a year and a half of planning, at least. And what was amazing, there's a couple different aspects of this. Trust me, the story gets more and more interesting as you read about it. And more information is going to come out undoubtedly. But it's one of the things I talked about in my video that I put on YouTube this morning, which is that what we see already is that, for instance, in the far north, Murmansk, which has a star there I see, what was destroyed there were some of the Tupolev 95s. Those are strategic bombers.
Wait, quickly. Murmansk, you mean this base, like Olnya?
Yeah,
okay,
Olenya.
okay,
Yep,
perfect.
there we go. Olenya Air Base. So that one was used to support the long-range nuclear strike capabilities across the Arctic as well as the Atlantic. So losing that's a big deal.
Yeah, that's insane. Let me see if I can get some questions from the audience, because again, people don't follow this war as closely, so I think they have questions that would be helpful to just get people more informed. What revenge? I saw on the revenge part, I think they're pulling out the Oreshnik missile, and they're pulling out. Oh, next stream, we'll have you and Czech together, so Czech can talk about the Oreshnik missile and Iskander, if I'm remembering correctly. That's the missile they're pulling out.
Yes.
Yeah. Let me see.
So one of the things that I think fascinating when you're looking at all these photos of what's coming out is that you look at what's left on the airfield in a lot of cases, and it's just a burnt out skeleton of what was an airplane. It's just gone. And that's typical when you have something like high octane aviation fuel that's exploded, or that they had the weapons already on board, and those were destroyed. So the bombs that they were carrying blew up with these airplanes. And one thing that has changed, and this is a big change in the war, is Ukraine, of course, has had drones that it's trained using artificial intelligence for a while. But you know what they did today that was just insane?
Yeah.
So in Poltava, which is central eastern part of Ukraine, there's an outdoor military museum, which has a bunch of Soviet aircraft. What the Ukrainians use that aircraft to train artificial intelligence to identify it. So when they released these drones, they were trained to look for these exact structures and go destroy them. And that's what they did. They were trained to go exactly for the aircraft as seen in this museum and destroy them. And today they did. And simply that's why the destruction was so great, was it wasn't random. It wasn't just a guy flying them in a lot of cases, but AI. They just were trained to lock and load, go right after them, and destroy these Russian aircraft.
This is where this war is like so useful in terms of like just military planning, right? Because even US, like when we put B2s near Diego Garcia for like just a message to Iran, they were wide open. So if Iran wanted to do something like that, there's a possibility they could have, but then again, a lot of distance, not enough land. So it's like NATO and US are learning a lot from everything Ukraine is doing.
Oh, absolutely the case. I mean, what's going on inside of Ukraine? There's a ton of data that's being received. And it's not just on our side. Obviously, NATO is learning out from this, the Western allies are. But we know that Russia shares a lot of this information, obviously, with Iran, which supplies the drones, Shahed drones. At least they designed them. A lot of them are now being constructed inside of Russia. But still, the data on that, how they function, how air defense functions, where they usually get shot down or how they get shot down. Now, Iran uses that information to improve the quality of drones, which they will use in the future for their own offensive purposes. But they also share that information with China. China is also receiving a ton of information. Now, it shares satellite information with the Russians and other sort of intelligence with the Russians, but it's receiving, in result of this, information as to how these drones function. Because this is a new way to wage war. The North Koreans, keep in mind, when they sent their soldiers over to help the Russians, they were expecting that their soldiers would learn a lot about how drones are used in modern warfare. Now, the Russians sent off a ton of the North Koreans to essentially become meat grinders. I mean, they just went through and died because they got shot up or blown up by drones. And so they didn't learn nearly as much as I think the North Koreans had hoped. But still, yes, the drones have changed the nature of this war.
100%. And yeah, we have actually a lot of interesting questions. But one thing that I keep wondering, like, even if they weren't under protected structures, the planes, like, bases usually do have some kind of, like, anti-air defense, right? Like, anti-aircraft machines. What happened to all that? Like,
so the key is that, now listen, there's a lot of operational information that still doesn't come out. We'll probably learn it. But looking at the videos that have come out, what we can say is this, is that they were in close enough proximity to the air bases that Russia wasn't able to pick them up and to sound the alarms in time. Secondly, a lot of them flew at low altitude, which saved them. But what we see, and this is sort of the amazing part, at least in one of the videos that's come out, and I'm sure there's many more at this point, is that trucks, just imagine like a normal 18-wheeler sort of truck, pulls up, it's got a soft cover, it doesn't have a hard cover on top, and the driver pulls off the soft cover, and out starts flying drones. So this guy would just roll up next to the military base, and these Ukrainian drones would just take off and go attack these targets on the nearby Russian military base.
yeah, actually, I do want to show the audience the video of the attack. I don't know if YouTube will allow us, but it's fine, it's live. If the live crashes, you guys know why it is. But be sure to hit the like button down below. I think this is the attack. I know, Jason, you won't be able to hear it, but I don't think this has any sound.
Оце так файно виглядає зараз аеродром Білая. Стратегічна ворожа авіація.
Там полыхает все. О, Господи, еще раз, девочки, еще.
Еще один летит. Где?
This is also where it's insane. The drone looks like a drone I could buy on Amazon.
It probably is. It's not going to be much different. I mean, the fact is, the drones that they've used, it's true what someone else said here, is that these are a lot of $300 drones. You'd be surprised how many of these things are really cheap. I mean, they're not exceeding a couple $1,000 each. And what was the impact? More than $7 billion of damage. Something that Russia will not recover from for decades.
This is where it's also scary because I was talking to someone. US does not have the supply chain to produce this drone at like mass capacity. It's all China. That's like the
Absolutely.
problematic for future.
It is. No, the fact is, it's also changed the paradigm. I mean, the U.S. has had drones, had things like the Predator, which are these large things that are extremely expensive to build. And honestly, at the end of the day, not nearly as effective as what Ukraine's been able to do. Keep in mind, a lot of what Ukraine's done are not, I wouldn't say, yeah, they are volunteers, but like hobbyists, people who decided they were going to study this, learn how to do drones, how to improve them, and they're building them and improving them. And it's going through generational leaps on like a monthly basis. What they could do 2 years ago is primitive compared to what the drones could do today. Their effectiveness today is simply out of this world.
Yeah, and also at the start of the war, Ukraine was like truly dependent on foreign drones, where it was like Turkish drones, or I don't know which other countries were sending drones. But now it's like they're exporting drones.
Exactly. No, the fact is Ukraine's ability with drones is just insane. And where it gets incredible is that the technology associated with the drone, for instance, the lenses, the infrared that's picking up on things, how fast they can track things down, try to figure out who's armed and not armed on the battlefield, how to identify if it's Ukrainian or Russian troops or vehicles. All these sorts of things are simply incredible. And also the advancements in payload. Before they could only carry, let's say, a kilogram, 2.2 pounds. And now they could carry incredible weights. It's getting heavier and heavier and heavier, which means more and more explosives can be carried. So ultimately, yes, these things are all game changers. The world of drones is having generational leaps ahead every single month.
Yeah, this is insane. So we also have a lot of questions now because I wasn't paying attention to the chat. So let's go through those a little bit. I mean, this we kind of answered, but the total cost, we still don't know the exact number, but it's like in the billions for sure.
Sure, definitely. We don't know the exact cost. I said this morning, this shows you how much information we're gathering. This morning, the video I posted on YouTube, on my channel, the estimate back then, way back then, was $3.1 to $3.4 billion. Currently, it's estimated being north of $7 billion of loss for Russia.
And now this is an argument a lot of people who are anti-Ukraine use a lot, that Ukraine is a corrupt country, so US shouldn't support it. So someone did ask a question when it comes to corruption, who wins, Ukraine or Russia? Maybe you can like explain a little that, like, why that's not a fair argument. Like, just because they're corrupt, which they do have a little bit of corruption, but then again, it's the Ukrainians who are catching the corruption. That's why we're learning about all this. And Russia is just fueling that conversation with misinformation too.
If we want to talk about corruption, Russia just had enough of its leadership bribed that drones destroyed 34% of the strategic bombers. That's incredible. Well, that's what corruption looks like. Ukraine fully does prosecute corruption. Obviously, there's corruption because there's corruption in every country. And that's why it makes the news in normal countries, including Ukraine, because they prosecute it. You go to jail if you're engaged in corruption. In Russia, it's a part of life. And that's why it's going to be very unlikely that they will really get to the root of this and try to really establish how all of today went down, because too many senior people are probably engaged in corruption. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, the Russian military is such a disaster, is specifically that. It's the corruption. The Russian military is so incredibly corrupt. So much is stolen. And that's, of course, great for Ukraine, because ultimately their own air defenses don't work because of it. They lack artillery because of it. People are getting out of military service because of it. This is all Russia's corruption, which is truly insanely bad. And it's one of the reasons that people don't do business in Russia, even before this war, is because it's simply a mess of a country.
Yeah, and also if Ukraine was truly corrupt at the top level, Russia would have just bought Zelensky, like instead of losing so many people.
It's so much cheaper. Like, listen, if Ukraine was really corrupt at the top, it'd be so much wiser for Russia just to show up and say, listen, let's make a deal. Let's, you guys say whatever you want publicly, but don't go towards NATO. Don't join the European Union. Just, find reasons to delay that, make excuses, make sure it doesn't get into the parliament for a vote. And people could have done that, but they weren't able to. Within Russia, the corruption is at the very top. And I mean, it's across the society, but the very top is where it's most significant, most clear. And that's where you see Putin is, as Elon Musk said, Vladimir Putin is undoubtedly the richest man in the world. He has robbed his nation blind. And I'm someone who has studied Russia now for 20 years. My PhD, my dissertation, was specifically about the Putin regime and its foreign policy. My master's was about the foreign policy of the Putin regime in Central Asia. It's what I've spent 20 years on. I'm telling you, the corruption in Russia is out of this world, and it is what sets Russia back. Did you know out of 140 million Russian citizens, 40 million of them do not have running water in their houses? Out of 140 million, 40 million do not have running water. That's what Russia is. This myth, this paper tiger that is something totally different. And that's why, despite losing over 600,000 soldiers in the past 2 years, being casualties, 600,000.
That's insane.
What did Russia gain? A territory smaller than Los Angeles County, California. To put it a different way, since 2022, Russia has lost territory in Ukraine. Keep in mind, Russia's population, 140 million, largest country in the history of the world. Ukraine, real population that's not under occupation, perhaps 22 million. 22 million, 140 million. Why is it that Russia has lost territory since 2022? Their military is a total joke. It is a disaster. And a lot of that's due to corruption throughout their military, their intelligence services, and at the most senior levels.
Yeah, it is insane because if I'm remembering correctly, Putin's dad was just like a low-level military guy, and now he has $1 billion houses. Not just $1 billion house, $1 billion houses.
Houses, multiple houses. In fact, yeah,
Ooh.
Population. And it's sort of incredible. So that's the myth of Putin. Putin is not a patriot, and I would argue he's actually not a nationalist even. Vladimir Putin is a criminal. He's interested in making lots of money with his pals, and that's what they're doing. They're robbing the Russian people. And they give him the distraction of religion, politics, nationalism. And why do they give them that distraction? So they don't ask questions like, hey, why is our quality of life so terrible? And they tell them either for the political reason, which is, well, we have to suffer a little bit, but because we're at war with the world and we're advancing the great Russia, or it's for our religion, we have to suffer in this life, but we'll be better in the next. That's all nonsense. They tell their population to control them. And it's something they do routinely. And it's not the first time in Russian history. That's a common trick, even in the imperial period, that is the Tsarist period. And in my YouTube channel, I talk about that a lot specifically.
And I know you probably know more than me, but we get this question a lot. It's like Russia invaded because NATO was getting close to it, and this is how we have answered this question before. And maybe you can let us know if it's accurate or not. So based on the research we did, before 2024, Ukrainians weren't really interested in joining NATO at all. Like if you look at the national polling in Ukraine, it was like 70% had no interest in joining NATO. They wanted to join EU for economic reasons. But then Russia saw apparently Putin cannot afford that for some reason. So he invaded and annexed Crimea. And that's when you see a switch where the Ukrainians are like, oh, we have to join NATO if you want to be like independent country. Otherwise, Russia is going to come at some point. Is that accurate? Because a lot of people, someone's asking this right now, that it was really NATO expansion that started this war. How would you answer that?
It makes that funny, and it's laughable, truly laughable, is that, all right, first we'll start with the European Union. Russia has said that they don't care if Ukraine joins the European Union. So we take that one out of the equation. But for NATO, the borders that Russia has with NATO today are far longer than they were just 3 years ago. Why is that? Well, guess what? Sweden and Finland have both joined NATO. And you got a map right there in front of us. But look at where Sweden and Finland are. The borders with NATO are longer than they were before. The fact is, Russia has done more to get more NATO closer to it than it could have ever done by not having touched Ukraine. NATO has never invaded a country. NATO's been around for 80 years. It's never invaded a country as NATO. It has never offensively attacked Russia. Russia once in its history, not once in its history, has been offensively attacked by Russia. By comparison, the countries seeking to join NATO all have a history of warfare with Russia. Ukraine being invaded in 2014, as you said, is exactly the reason, and you see in the public polling, there's tons of public polling, and I remember this period. I remember very clearly just a decade and a half ago, nobody really cared about NATO. The majority of people said, yeah, but how does it really help us? Russia would never attack us. Russia's, why would they ever do that? We don't cause any problems for them. And it's always been their position. And since 2015, it's been in the constitution of Ukraine that they're going to seek NATO membership. But guess what? There was no real movement towards it. Ukraine was still like a decade and a half away from joining NATO. There was no chance of them getting in the near term. But Russia says that was the cause? Well, okay. So what's Russia's response to Finland and Sweden join NATO? You know what the response is? Nothing. They know they can't do anything about it. Russia comes up with excuses. Don't confuse yourself. Russia invaded Ukraine because it chooses to invade Ukraine. It's because it chooses to engage in terrorism, not because of NATO.
Yeah, 100%. Also, we have the clip you were talking about of the drones taking out of the, what is it called? The containers? Yeah, so I'm going to play this for the audience real quick.
Вот он, коптер опять взлетел. Откуда взлетает, ничего не понятно, блядь. Вот он, клоун, блядь. Оба ни с того ни с сего, сука. Оба! Вот дела, блядь. Ёб твою мать, до чего техника дошла. А нахуя мы работаем за рулем-то, блядь? Лучше он коптер сшибает от автомата.
Also, we also have a clip which 100% we cannot show on YouTube, where I think one of these containers was like done sending drones. So some citizen went in or someone went in and then it's self-destructed. Hopefully the audience understands what I mean. So we cannot show that because we have confirmation that guy is not here anymore.
So, you know what's sort of interesting is I was just talking to Malcolm Nance, who's a friend of mine, and Malcolm had a really good point. He said, you know, what I bet the Ukrainians are doing, and I'm sure he's right about this, is that they undoubtedly involved some of the best drone manufacturers inside of Russia, some of the biggest producers of specific parts, strategically important parts that are hard to get. And why would Ukraine do that? And there's a very simple reason, because now they've burned them. Now these guys are all going to be under investigation by the Russian authorities, and it's probably going to put them out of commission. That means Ukraine has also eliminated some of those who are posing a threat to it by producing Russian drones. That's also a huge move. So we got more than simply the multiple air bases inside of Russia, the 4 air bases that were attacked. We got the naval base that was attacked, that attacked the submarine as well. A nuclear submarine was attacked by Ukrainian drones. We also have the fact that we might have set back significantly Russia's ability to create drones even within its own country.
Yeah, this was, I think we made a video on this, but Russia only had, this is where it's so interesting. Russia only has one fiber optic producing plant. And I think early February, someone posted about it, like a random Twitter account on February something that he posted about it. Oh, it would be interesting if Ukraine destroyed that plant. 2 weeks later, there was an attack on the plant. So they're getting information from Twitter too.
So it's insane is that Ukraine has gone after so many strategic things. Of course, listen, they've gone after the oil industry. That makes a lot of news because it makes a really big kaboom when they get struck. But they've gone after also the best of the artificial intelligence inside of Russia, specifically those that are used by the Russian government's military. If you go after those, it's a big setback for the Russian military. It's not like they've got tons of options. They can't just download ChatGPT. They're limited. And the fact that they keep going after this, going after these other targets, says a lot. But one of the things that it says is that there's probably collusion coming from within the Russian side. There is a lot of indications that there are people within Russia who are feeding information to the Ukrainians, either for cash or for long-term interest, or they're hoping to avoid sanctions in the future. There's people betraying Russia within Russia. And I assure you, for Vladimir Putin, that's an even scarier thought than the fact that's already passed that all these bases got attacked. What's scarier is there might be an enemy even closer here within.
Yeah.
And who is it?
100%. Now, we do have a lot of really, really good comments about everything you're saying. Someone said, I love how excited Jason is. Peak Russian commentary.
It is. I gotta say, I'm a little bit giddy. I'm not usually in such a, let's say, delighted mood talking about warfare. But today was such a big setback. As I said, in 84 years, since June 22nd, 1941, that morning when Operation Barbarossa was launched by the Nazis against the Soviet Union, they invaded. They destroyed more aircraft, but it was not as strategically important as the aircraft that was destroyed today. Today was the single biggest loss for Russia in more than 80 years, perhaps in history. 34% of Russia's strategic bombers that are used for nuclear attacks are no longer able to be used. This is huge.
100%. And yeah, you've been following Russia for decades now. I think 20 years or something like that, right? So by the way, Jason's channel is right above in the chat. If you guys go to the chat, definitely go check it out. Definitely subscribe. He has made a lot of great videos in just last week. So if you're following this war, if you don't know enough about it, definitely check out his channel. But
thank you.
Interesting thing, something that someone did bring up. Is this a huge escalation? Does this put the war in like a different level? How would you see that?
I would certainly not call it escalation. I would say it's a natural continuation of events. But does it change the war? Yes, it does, because Russia physically now is decapacitated. Keep in mind, Russia's only strength, it's a poor country. Its economy is smaller than the economy of Italy's. Despite the fact that it is a massive country, look at the map there, how big Russia is, look where Italy is. It's a country that is very impoverished and broken. And guess what? The one thing it had was this idea that it could project strength specifically through its nuclear fleet, its strategic bombers. But when it doesn't have that, what does Russia have to project strength? And just put yourself in the shoes of somebody in the White House. If Russia did not have nuclear weapons at all, would anyone care what Russia thought? They're not a major player globally. They're not. Economically, they're not. Even when you say, well, look at their allies. They're allied with China. Well, guess what? China, less than 2% of its trade is with Russia. trade with the United States, the European Union, and our allies in Asia is 15 times greater. When it comes to India, it's about the same ratio. The fact is that Russia is a very small partner for all of its big allies. Perhaps North Korea, it's a bigger partner. But does anyone really care? Is that an economic power that we're really vying for? No, it's not. Russia is a poor, impoverished country. And this is not an escalation by any means. This decapacitates Russia's ability to project strength and to attack Ukrainian cities.
Yeah, this is how General Ben Hodges always says. It's always better to go after the archer than the arrows. And that's exactly what Ukraine is doing.
Absolutely the case. And Ben Hodges, who's somebody who I've known for a long time, who I have a great admiration for, I've talked to him at length, just as a friend. And I've said, what should really happen? If you were in the shoes of the Ukrainians, what would you say? And exactly the quote you just used, you've got to go after archers, not the arrows. And if you go after those who are the ones firing the missiles into Ukraine, using those ballistic missiles, that's exactly how you stop future attacks. And guess what? You don't think Russia's going to be a lot more cautious at this point to bring those aircraft closer to the Ukrainian border? I assure you, this has been a huge wake-up call for them. This sets them back. It's something I talk about a lot on my YouTube channel, which is that Russia is a country that likes to show that it's strong, that it's tough, but it's like a bully, and it really is. If you punch him once really hard in the face, the chance that he's going to come and pick on you again goes down really fast. Russia is a country that does not have the military, economic, or political capacity to fight a serious war. And that's why it's been unable to take Ukraine, despite being substantially larger, both militarily, economically, as well as to have everything necessary to do it. Why has it failed? Because Russia ultimately is a very weak country. It tries to project the opposite, but the facts speak for themselves.
Yeah, and also it's like, what could they escalate? They've been yelling about nuclear warfare all this time. They're like, we're going to launch nukes anytime now. They've been saying...
Well, and they're not, ultimately, for people that worry about nuclear warfare, I think it's totally, not realistic. And it's not realistic for a lot of reasons. And one of the most simple reasons I'll give you is that Russia does not do the correct upkeep on its nuclear weapons.
Someone actually asked that question, yeah.
Listen, it's really expensive to have nuclear weapons. It's not cheap. It's not like you just create this thing and it sits there in a crate. No, you've got to verify that it works, check on it. Russia's not doing that. And that's where it becomes a problem. So let's imagine a hypothetical situation that tomorrow Putin decides, I'm going to go all in. I'm going to toss some nukes, lob some nukes over at Kiev. Okay, imagine if they didn't detonate. Imagine if they just bounced around. Then he's shown the entire world that he's impotent. The emperor has no clothes. His nuclear ability to attack doesn't actually exist. Guess what? Russia just went from a country that could project strength to a country that showed that it is naked and impotent and unable to actually fulfill its threats. And if you cannot fulfill your threats, your value in geopolitics is null. And guess who else notices that? The Chinese notice that. The Iranians notice that. North Koreans notice that. So Russia's allies are going, do we really want to be betting on this guy? This might turn out really badly for us. There's no country that benefits from being with a country that can't actually act upon the threats that it makes.
100%. And someone asked too, there's definitely going to be a retaliation, right? But then again, they have used the Oreshnik again. And it was less of an attack, more of like an informational warfare, where they were like, oh, we could use nukes on these missiles. Go ahead.
So what? The Oreshnik, that's totally like a thing that people talk about a lot. One, it's not true that it's impossible for Ukraine to shoot down. That's just false. Now, it's more difficult and challenging. That is true, due to the fact that they put on specific stuff in order to distract the radar and other things. But to say that it's this miracle gun, listen, if Russia really had this miracle gun for the past year, they would have used it. They would have already destroyed the Ukrainian equivalent of the Pentagon, of their intelligence services. Why haven't they destroyed them? Because they cannot. They physically do not have the capacity. If they could, they would have done it already. They have not because they cannot. Not because they don't wish to. They cannot. Russia cannot do anything more to escalate than what it's currently doing. In Kiev, I think it's virtually all the children's hospitals at this point have been struck. And keep in mind, 98% of Kiev is perfectly fine. It's not been touched by this war. It's not been hit by missiles. Strange that all the children's hospitals get hit, isn't it? It's not by coincidence. That's what Russia chooses to do.
Yeah, and you've been in and out of Kiev a lot, right? Like, how's the situation there when all these attacks happen? Well,
it's obviously tense. I mean, at nights it can be very, very loud. It's very frequently very, very loud at nights inside of Kiev. What's interesting about it is that it changes the society. So obviously I work at the Kiev Post. And I also now, as of last week, do my YouTube channel, which you've posted above. But what's interesting is that when you're in Kiev, everyone's used to these attacks. So when you come to work and you say you're tired, or you come to late work because you slept in because the attacks were in the middle of the night, everyone gets it. No one's on your case because we're all sort of, there's a solidarity. We're all in the same shoes. Now, in the case of Russia, we don't see that. And we can read this, and we know this because we can read what they write on social medias. We can read what they write on their Telegram channels. And it's quite the opposite. They're shocked. They cannot believe that the Ukrainians are attacking, say, Moscow. And they go absolutely nuts. They go bananas when they see these attacks because they say, well, how's it possible? How are the Ukrainians doing this to us? How's it possible? And they get panicked. You know, I'm sure we've discussed before, is that I was in Kursk, Russia, less than a year ago, just a few months ago. Now, that's a part of Russia, the southern part of Russia, that's under Ukrainian occupation. And so I was there. I went up. The Ukrainian military invited me as a journalist. I went there, walked around, and I walked around alone, by the way. So I had soldiers back in the armed personnel carrier, but I walked around without a bulletproof jacket, without a helmet, and I talked to people. I talked to Russians on the street, and I asked them, so what's going on? How are things? And obviously I speak Russian, so there's a background to that. Okay. And what was interesting about that was that, one, they weren't scared of the Ukrainian soldiers. In fact, I was surprised how often they approached in the streets to ask about, when streets were going to be open and when this was going to happen. When, I can assure you, when Russians are occupying Ukrainian territory, nobody approaches them. They're scared, terribly scared of them. But it wasn't the same. The Russian citizens in Kursk were not scared of them. But the second thing is, and this is the key part for me, was how much they directly blamed the Putin regime for their current situation, that is, their occupation. They said, why did Putin start this? We didn't need this. This didn't make our life better. How in any way does this help me? Why the hell would he do this? And they're mostly older people because everybody under age like 50 hit the road. So their kids who were adults and their grandchildren who were kids had left. And I said, when's the last time you talked to them? Oh, all our family members ran away. And I said, well, didn't anyone try to stay here to fight? Didn't anyone ask for weapons from the Russian military so they could defend Kursk? No, nobody did that. And it's true. There was no resistance. The Russians just accepted occupation. They don't support the regime. And if you think that's just a myth, remember when Prigozhin, today's his birthday, founder of the Wagner Group, or the leader, I should say, one of the leaders, when Prigozhin rolled into Rostov and tried to overthrow the Russian military leadership last year, what happened? Well, when he got to Rostov, and you can see the videos online, you see Russian citizens coming up to him, they're giving his soldiers food, giving them wine, giving them water, thanking them, bringing them flowers. You can see it online. This is not something that is just a rumor. You could see online the Russian senior military leadership, when he got to Rostov, which is, keep in mind, 200 miles from Moscow, when they got there, the senior military leadership came out and they were chatting with him. They drank coffee with him. They smoked cigarettes with him. They were saying, you really shouldn't do this. It's really not good to do that. But what's the most important part of the story? What we did not see, though everybody knew he was coming, they could see him coming. They knew where he was hundreds of kilometers in advance. They did not call in an airstrike. We did not see the Russian police try to stop him, the local police. We did not see the border guards. We did not see the National Guard. We did not see the Chechens. We did not see the Russian military. Nobody tried to stop him. Nobody called in an airstrike on Prigozhin. And why is that? It's because the Russian military leadership was not sure who would win. They thought maybe Prigozhin will take power. And there's silence in Moscow. Medvedev, the former president, silent. Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, silent. Look at the senior Russian leadership. Silence. And why is that? Why didn't they say, well, we're behind Putin all the way? Because they weren't sure if Putin would maintain power. They thought Putin might fall. And so they're trying to hedge their bets as to what would come next.
Yeah. Medvedev also seems to be going crazy because I saw a few days ago he was threatening Trump with World War III. Like, he would have any power.
Which is just insane because when you look at it, I think it was in I want to say it was February last year, just in 1 month, 18 times he threatened nuclear war or World War III. So it's what he constantly does. And it's actually, if someone's really interested in it, there's a reason for that. And there's a very simple reason for that. Is that in the Russian, and anyone who's ever trying to understand Russia the rest of your life, notice this. Keep an eye on this. Russia has a couple different categories. The top category is, let's say, Putin. Putin never makes comments like, we'll start World War III. No, he sort of implies things sometimes, and that's really extreme. But what he'll never do, and never does, he'll never say something like, Trump or Biden is an idiot, or they don't know what they're doing. Never. Why is that? Putin's role is to always look like he's above the fray. Keep in mind, it's a dictatorship. Everybody has roles. It's not like they just choose to do whatever. That's his role. He looks like he's above the fray. He's a serious diplomat. He's etc. But those who are below him have to be the attack dogs. And that's why you have people like Medvedev, like the popular press, which is Kremlin-backed or Kremlin-controlled, which comes out with these really extreme propaganda statements about we could start World War III, we're going to nuke New York and Washington and Paris and Berlin. They're not going to do any of that. But they know that they have to project strength because the Russian senior leadership never says that. It's because they always distinguish between the two different ones. Putin's spokesman, his name is Dmitry Peskov, never says things like that. In fact, last week, when Trump said that Putin was crazy, Peskov said, well, we don't take it personally. Trump, we know, is under tremendous strain and pressure right now, and we appreciate everything he's done to try to reach peace between our countries. Now, why do you say that? Then Medvedev said, we're going to start World War III. They're playing different roles. The guy representing Putin has to say we're above the fray, we're serious diplomats, because that's what the Russian population wants to see. The ones that have to act like clowns, the propagandists, Sobolev and these other people, the drunk former president, Dmitry Medvedev, they're playing their role, which is to be the saber rattlers.
And you know, Medvedev's also, I think he's following the channel or something, because we have never tweeted anything. We didn't start tweeting until like 2 days ago. And suddenly I just saw Medvedev blocked Business Basics on Twitter.
Really? That's amazing.
So he's going to see this, hopefully. Yeah, that was funny. But we'll recap for everyone that's joining. By the way, we got almost 1,500 people. If you haven't hit the like button, be sure to do that right below. It really helps us out. And today we have Jason J. Smart, who's been breaking it down for all this time. His channel is right above in the chat. So definitely go check it out. Definitely go subscribe. He's been following this war for a long time now. Let me recap for everyone. So as you can see from your screen, Ukraine carried out attacks on multiple Russian air bases today, a lot of them very deep inside Russia. So that was the big surprise, because the distance of this base, Belia, this is almost more than the distance between New York and LA. So this was extremely deep and definitely a big deal. Here are some clips of the attack. We'll replay that for anyone who's just joining in.
Оце так файно виглядає зараз аеродром Білая. Стратегічна ворожа авіація.
Там полыхает все. О, Господи, еще раз, девочки, еще.
Еще один летит. Где? Смотри, что творится, я не знаю даже, что это сейчас взорвалось.
Also, just to recap, since this was really deep, it wasn't actually Ukrainian drones traveling from Ukraine to these bases. This was actually a drone that was smuggled into Russia using containers. They were on the roof of the container, they were hidden, and when it came time for the attack, the container just opened automatically. The drones went to their target, and as Jason covered earlier in the stream, a lot of these drones had AI, so it wasn't even someone controlling it. They were basically programmed to look for the Russian bombers and just attack them. And here's just one clip we have of a drone just taking off from one of the containers. And after the attack was done, the truck self-destructed. So basically, Russians couldn't really learn much from this. The truck was just, it bombed itself, I guess.
Вот он, коптер опять взлетел. Откуда взлетает, ничего не понятно, блядь. Вот он, клоун, блядь. Оба ни с того ни с сего, сука. Оба! Вот дела, блядь. Ёб твою мать, до чего техника дошла. А нахуя мы работаем за рулем-то, блядь? Лучше он коптером управляй, нахуй, грузовая.
This is also, Jason, interesting to me at least, because we've been following this war, like, not as much as you, but we've been following it from the beginning. If I was that guy, I wouldn't be that close to that truck. So we know that the Russian people don't really get the information about the war as like people outside are getting.
Well, it's interesting is I also thought about that. I said, what's this guy standing next to the truck? So there's something else here that if you want to look and try to read between the tea leaves is sort of important and very interesting, is that there is a ton of videos of these things taking off. There's a ton of videos of them being transported to the locations from which they then attack these Russian bases. And what that tells us is two things. It means, one, there's somebody on the inside who understood what was going on who took these videos. And if you were this guy and you didn't have any idea you were driving this truck, and who knew these drones would pop out and start attacking this Russian military base, why would you stand there? Wouldn't you run the other way or do something? Why didn't they? It's because they were fully cognizant of what they were doing. The fact is, there is collusion within Russia.
And also, a lot of people are tweeting, like, wasn't there a ceasefire? Again, for people who haven't been following the war, U.S. offered a ceasefire where both parties just agree and then they negotiate. They agreed to a ceasefire. Ukraine has agreed to multiple unconditional ceasefire. It's Russia who's not agreeing to a ceasefire, and then attacks like these happen. They cry about Ukrainian attacking Russia. In war,
Exactly.
That's what happens.
That's exactly the case. And the fact is, that's why you remember in the past couple of weeks, President Trump has been so frustrated and angry. And he said that. I mean, his exact words were, I'm getting really pissed off with Putin. His exact quote. Why he said that is because multiple times Putin said to him on the phone, sure, we agree to a ceasefire. Not a problem. We agree. We're not going to attack the energy infrastructure, for instance, was the first agreement they had. And guess what? Within less than an hour, Russia attacked energy infrastructure of Ukraine. Within less than an hour. So Putin is just lying. He's bluffing. And Putin, by the way, is sort of interesting because it's less in the American press or the Western press, but it's definitely in the Russian press a lot, is that Putin treats Trump like an idiot, like a chump. And where you see that is in the first phone call they had, Putin was on a stage in St. Petersburg, and the guy who was interviewing him on the stage in front of like hundreds of people on national TV said, aren't you late for a phone call with the U.S. president? Wasn't it supposed to start already? And he goes, yeah, it's fine. He has to wait. Now, keep in mind, why would the Russian president, he knew very well there was going to be this call with Trump. Why would he do that? To show that he doesn't care what Trump thinks, that he's above Trump. Guess what? The last phone call they had, which was last week or the week before, I guess, Putin was down in Sochi, which is in southern Russia, and he was visiting a music school, so a kid's music school. And he jumped into one of the classrooms to do the phone call with the U.S. president. He didn't even set time aside from his schedule to be at a facility or to be at his offices to do this call. He did it, and why would the Russian press even release that? Let's imagine, okay, for whatever reason, he had to be at that school. Why did the Russian press report this? Because the Kremlin told them. The Kremlin went out of their way to report this because they wanted to make a point that Putin did not care about these calls with Trump.
100%. And yeah, by the way, we can stop whenever. I know we've been 1 hour in, so the chat's still going, so I'm just going.
Keep going, sure.
Okay, whenever you have to go, just let us know. We'll roll down the stream. But did you hear about the Putin assassination attempt, or I guess a drone attack on his helicopter? I wonder if that was serious. Yeah.
So what's interesting about that was, so you can understand that, is that it's very important for Putin and his image and the image he's constructed over the past quarter century in Russia, is that he's invincible. So they virtually never will you see from the Russian state press, the official press, will they say that Putin was under attack or something like that, because that would show that, you know, there's a risk that they cannot necessarily control. So they don't do it for sympathy. It's not something that they would think is a positive that Putin was under attack. And yet they said that Putin's helicopter, which was in a fleet of helicopters flying at the same time, presumably, near southern Russia, was attacked by Ukrainian drones. The Russian press came out with that. That was not the Ukrainian press. That was not Ukrainian propaganda. That is the Russian press, the Russian government specifically. They said, well, Putin was safe, and, you know, our aircraft were able to defend him, blah, 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 blah. But why did they really say that? It's because he really was put in danger, and they're trying to control the story before it spread further. But the fact is, it shows something very important. It shows that Putin, who, keep in mind, he has a social contract with the Russian people. He, in theory, projects strength. He's the one who gives them stability, unlike the wild 1990s in Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But if he's not able to give them strength and stability, even within Russia, that is, he can no longer guarantee the security of his own self. Obviously, parts of Russia are currently under Ukrainian occupation, parts of Belgorod Oblast, parts of Kursk Oblast. And now today we saw 4 major airfields attacked and destroyed. We saw a nuclear submarine attacked by Ukraine today. We saw the Black Sea Fleet has been demolished by Ukraine. This does not look very good for Putin. This shows that, in fact, he's much weaker than what he likes to show others that he is. In fact, he's projecting weakness, not strength. And in the world of Putin, if you read about the guy and you read him for the last couple decades, that is central to who he is. He has to always show that he's the strongest, toughest guy. Showing that he's not, or he can't control the situation, is the opposite of what he wants.
Exactly. That makes sense. I'll look through a little bit chat, see. Oh, someone asked if this is false flag. It's pretty impossible this is a false flag, depending how much damage there was.
No, you don't destroy 34% of your strategic bombers in a false flag. And for that matter, the Ukrainians have released so much material now showing how they plan this and everything else well in advance. And the shock on the side of the Russians is just insane. I mean, they're absolutely beyond themselves. They don't understand how this happened, how it's transpired, how to justify this. Now, imagine you're an average Russian. If they can't control what's going on in an airfield that has the strategic nuclear bombers, how are they going to be able to protect you in your little village or your little city? The fact is they can't. Once again, the emperor has no clothes. This is a very dangerous narrative for Putin and his regime, that he is not the ever-present, ever-strongman that he likes to show people and tell people that he is.
And yeah, this I guess goes in perfectly. Sam in Texas asked, Putin will be in domestic trouble if he falls short of, I guess, taking over Ukraine. I'm not sure what he means, but...
Well, domestically, he's already got problems. I mean, and one of the things that's sort of important that people don't have to talk about, but something I spend a lot of time doing videos on my YouTube channel about, is the Russians will lose, and I think, and this for a few different reasons. There's three different factors. The one that we usually talk about is the military factor, but there's also a political factor and an economic factor. So look at a political factor where we saw a huge failure. Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group, tried to overthrow the government, and guess what? Nobody stopped him. That's a sign of political weakness. That's political instability. But look at economic instability, which is a different aspect. And that's the reason I think that ultimately Russia will lose, is that the Russian ruble is highly destabilized. The Russian economy is destabilized. The current inflation rate is realistically close to 27%. The central bank says it's 10%. But that doesn't make sense, because the central bank has decided the key interest rate is 21%. So Professor Steve Hanke, who teaches at Johns Hopkins, projects that it's probably closer to 27%. So you have 27% inflation. You have in the past month, about 7% of Russians who are active in the workforce have defaulted on their credit card loans. You have the fact that a majority of banks are suffering a serious liquidity crisis. According to the Central Bank of Russia, 9.5% of, the majority of banks have only 9.5% liquidity of the deposits. In a normal banking system, you should have 20 to 30%. They have less than half of that, less than the 20%, which is the bottom. They have 9.5%. What that means is people cannot take out their cash if they want to. The country is primed to have bank runs. It has significant internal economic problems. The average worker in Moscow spends 3/4 of their salary on rent. There is a massive bubble in their mortgage market, which is far worse than what we saw in 2008 in the United States. Far worse. It's amazing how bad the situation is. We're talking tens of billions of dollars of bad loans coming back. And every month, when you look at the economic data coming out from the central bank, which, by the way, tries to make things not look so bad, the numbers are insanely bad. They are not sustainable.
And also, they actually have a good central bank like chief, which Putin didn't want her to resign. Yeah, because this is with like her doing everything she can to save the economy.
She's that's an unfortunate thing, is that Nebelin is her name. She's super smart. She is doing a great job as the head of the central bank, and that's really unfortunate. But she's doing her absolute best to try to control the situation, and she knows it's terrible.
Yeah.
But Putin, because he's a populist, and he's trying to figure out how to make the population happy, says, well, let's give out some more loans. Let's do this. Let's do that. Guess what? Their economy can't afford it. They're printing money. And so the ruble has been really fluctuating a lot in the last couple of years. As you saw, it's currently about 81 to the dollar. It's projected by Russian bankers that realistically by the end of this year will be closer to 120, 110 to the dollar. Now imagine you're the average worker. If you went from 80 rubles to the dollar, and you're up to 120, that means you've lost 50% of your income. Now, if you're paying already 3/4 of your money for rent, and you lost 50% of your income, it's going to be very difficult to pay for electricity, the heating, the food. You can't pay for anything. You're broke. And Russians are defaulting, and corporations are defaulting at an alarming rate, which is great for Russia. And it's something I talk about a lot on my YouTube channel.
Well, crazy part is while we were live, I think Ukraine launched another attack. 150 drones going into Moscow.
Awesome. It is beautiful. Yeah, and by the way, I think a lot of people were predicting that this was just the first phase. And guess what? Because everybody has now rushed to these different regions within Russia, Look where they. I mean, you have the map there. If you look where they are, look where Moscow. So, yeah, perfect. If you look where the attacks were last night, that's a different map. Sorry.
Yeah.
If you look where the attacks were last night, there we go. Thanks a lot, buddy. So look where Moscow is. So you got two bases that are somewhat near that, but the biggest and the most important attacks were the ones in the far east there that you see, and the one in the far north there you see. If the senior military leadership has all fled over there and run over there to go do this investigation, guess what? Who's near Moscow? Who's able to protect Moscow right now? They decapitated themselves by sending their leadership over there. And that's not probably surprising. The biggest disaster they've had since June 22nd, 1941, they've sent their senior leadership to those two locations for the far east and the far north. And the result is, who's in Moscow to manage the crisis that is unfolding as we speak? There is no one in Moscow.
Okay, I guess we'll then just talk about this last question. These attacks, do you think they are getting us closer towards a peace deal, or is it going to just push Russia to be more maximalist in their demands and they would want to attack even harder?
The reality is that Russia's not going to be anyways phased by this. It changes nothing. Because at the end of the day, Vladimir Putin does not want to see this war end. And I think part of that reason is that Vladimir Putin receives a lot of bad information. He is given false information. He's being told that Russia's gaining, it's doing really well. And today, I don't know how they're going to try to justify that to him, but in his mind, he sincerely believes if he just keeps pressing, Russia's going to win. Now, all the economists in Russia are disagreeing with him. All the people in the military are not agreeing with him. There's nobody in Moscow that has a mystery plan that's going to allow Russia to take Kiev. There is no one. There is no one that has a plan for that. And yet, he's being told that they just have to keep trucking along and they'll get there. At its current rate, it would take 95 years for Russia to take the rest of Ukraine. 95 years. Assuming that they continue to lose hundreds of thousands of soldiers a month, which actually they'd run out of soldiers or people in Russia before they'd be able to achieve that. The fact is that it doesn't really change anything. Vladimir Putin does not want to end the war right now. He does not think it's necessary. And he's continuing to show that. I mean, he continues to lie to Donald Trump and to mock him, actually, by the way he behaves. So the fact is, this changes nothing. And the sooner that the Russian military is brought to its knees, the better off it is for everybody.
100%. And by the way, if you guys enjoyed the live stream, definitely check out Jason. His channel is linked. I'll post the link right now too, so you guys can check that out. And we'll just do some quick fire questions from the audience, because audience has Diego said justice will be served. I guess I'm guessing he's talking about Ukraine serving the justice. Let me look. If it's 34% of the bombers were destroyed, Marshall is asking, are there bombers still within the range of Ukraine? Are airfields still operational?
Yes, there are still operational bombers within the range of Ukraine. So they have a number of different bases. At this stage, though, it puts them all at risk. If I was Russia, and presumably what Russia is going to do, is relocate them in the short term because they're scared that there might be additional attacks coming. The smartest thing that they could do is move their bombers to a more geographically restrained location where it would be harder for Ukraine to attack. Russia simply doesn't have enough to keep playing this game. It has to protect its bombers.
100%. And someone asked, there were talks tomorrow in Istanbul. Is that still on?
They're still on as of at least an hour ago. The Russian leadership had just arrived to Istanbul.
Let's see what happens. I think we'll find out. We'll do another stream if anything big happens. And I feel like there might be because of the retaliation. But definitely go check out Jason. And thank you so much for taking time out of your day to do this.
Hey, great talking with you as always.